Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Reardon, President of Morticulture Audubon Society, and welcome to this evening's community program, Morticulture, the abundant life in old and dead trees. As usual, I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous communities of the chapter area, including the Pagusset, Wepawag, Quinnipiac, Tutucket, Minunketuk, and Hammonasset people. As we advocate for the conservation of the land and its wildlife, we're indebted to the work of the native and indigenous people who cherished the land for thousands of years before European colonization. We have a whole bunch of events that they're coming up in the next month or so. I'll drop links in the chat, and then on tomorrow I will send out the links in an email to all those of you that registered. We're pleased to welcome back Margery Winters. She's the director of Roaring Brook Nature Center in Canton, and I'm looking forward to hearing about dead and dying trees. Margery.
All right, thank you. I'll get my slides up. And if everyone would like to mute themselves, and there we are. All right, so yes, Morticulture was a wonderful name. I came across it several years ago. I was just scanning the internet, and I thought, it's not what you do in the garden when you kill plants. This is a term that was coined by Dr. Mark Harmon. He's a professor at Oregon State University. And years ago, he started to study what was happening when you chopped down a tree and it started to rot. How long would it take? What happens? And he's been doing this for over 30 years. And he has the wonderful nickname of Dr. Death. So that is what we're going to talk about tonight. So generally, when we look at our woods, everyone looks from the ground up. That's where we are. That's what we look at. And when I go for a walk in the wood, then the trees are wonderfully valuable. They do all sorts of things for us. I teach at the Roaring Brook Nature Center in Canton. We go around to various schools and ask any grade school children. They'll always say the trees produce oxygen. They're not the only ones. The algae in the ocean do a good job too. But they do a variety of things that we know of. And if you ask a forester, they have a whole other list of attributes that harvested trees provide. So all very important. These are products that we do need and use. But tonight I'm going to talk about what happens when a tree dies. And sometimes if we looked at the forest, we might see one dead tree, and that doesn't seem to be a concern. Maybe we'll see a couple of dead trees. But when we start seeing multiple dead trees, suddenly become very concerned what is happening to the forest. But actually, dead and dying trees is an important part of the forest process. And you need the dead and dying trees to open up the canopy and allow new trees to grow. So the question is, which tree is more valuable? Is it the dead tree or the live tree? And it depends how you look at it, and which one has more value to the forest, or which one has more value to us. So quite often, I think our value of what we look at with a tree is influenced by what we're taught. So this is the standard definition of the life cycle of an oak tree. It starts with the acorn, it sprouts, it becomes a sapling, then it becomes a mature oak that makes acorns, and the whole process starts again. But in my mind, something is missing there. And it's a very important step in the life cycle of a tree. White oaks can live to be very old, 600 years, red oaks, 400 years. So these are things that we need to take into account. And our forests are not that old. Once it starts getting old, it starts to do something important called senescing. It's starting its decay process. Its branches, some of the branches are dying, they're falling off, and the tree might become hollowed out. And so you might end up with a hollow snag, which in turn might fall over and provide a hollow log for wildlife. But this is an important part. And once the log is on the ground, it starts to decompose, and that decomposition then provides a lot of organic matter for the soil. It turns into that wonderful soil product called humus. which feeds the soil food web and provides life for the trees. So this is a very important part of the life cycle, and we tend to gloss over it. So I think instead we need a complete life cycle of an oak tree, and that includes leaving some of the trees to get to be of very old age and senescing, decomposition, and then that provides the nutrient-rich forest floor for the acorns to take seed. So I think this is a much better explanation of what's going on with our trees. We tend to forget that. So if you look at our forests, they all tend to be rather tidy. The understory is rather open, primarily because of deer, but also because of the history of the land. You see, there aren't that many old trees. They're mostly younger trees. This is a forest that hasn't been a forest for very long. And that's because if you look back at the history of Connecticut, you can see that in 1830, so only 200 years ago or so, Connecticut had been pretty much clear-cut for farmland. And it's only since, and occasionally a tree was left. This is called a wolf tree. And it's an important aspect. This tree was left to shelter the cows and horses on a hot summer's day, so they didn't get heat stroke on a day much like today. But now we have a lot of young mature forests. After the farms were abandoned in the late 1800s, farmers moved west to better farmland, and the default setting for Connecticut is trees. If you leave a field unmowed by the cows and the horses, you will get forest. So we have a lot of young mature forests, and they cover a little less than 60% of our land. And every once in a while, if you go into a forest, you might see a wolf tree. They're not always labeled like this, but it's usually the oldest tree. It's a tree that, because it was growing out in the field, it was able to spread its branches, and that's one of the distinguishing features. Again, they don't always have these signs to them, but they're a very important habitat tree in the forest. So we just don't have them in our forests. Our forests are not old enough to really develop those, except for the areas where the forest is overtaken a pasture. But this is a very important part of the forest. We need dead and dying trees. You can see here the woodpeckers have been hard at work on this old dead tree. Parts have fallen to the ground. And this is what we should be seeing in our forests. We should be seeing the dead things. And I like to think of the old dead trees that the woodpeckers have excavated as the supermarket, shopping, supermarket, pharmacy, and apartment buildings of the forest. This is the high rent district in the forest. This is where a lot of our nesting birds, I think there are over 40 species of birds that in our area that do nesting in trees. And we need snags. And a snag, of course, is an old dead tree that's hollowed out, or maybe not. But these are very critical part of habitat in the forest. But how these trees die really affects their ultimate role in the forest ecosystem. So if there's an ice storm and the branches break off, that will open up the tree to infection and fungal rot in the area where the branch is broken off. Microbursts, such as happened in the Adirondacks and I think it was the early 2000s, downed a lot of trees and opened up an area, leaving a lot of debris on the ground. And of course, occasionally we get hurricanes. I just finished a book reading about the 1930 hurricane that roared through Connecticut and Massachusetts and Rhode Island in 1938, and knocked down a tremendous number of trees. It was an unexpected hurricane. People did not realize that hurricanes could come this way. We're far more, knowledgeable about that now, but in 1938, this came as a big surprise to people, despite the fact that it happened before. And of course, by 1938, the trees were starting to grow back, not nearly as much as they've grown back now. So this would be an interesting scenario should we get another hurricane. And when the trees were knocked down, it was seen as a huge waste, all this valuable timber on the ground. What can we do? So people quickly, it was a tangled mess. Now, these tangled messes, there are a lot of seedlings in the ground that they would start coming up. And this tangled mess actually prevents the deer from eating the seedlings. But what people looked upon this as a total waste. And this it came to be known as CWD, or coarse woody debris. But fortunately, we've started to understand that it's not debris so much, it's coarse woody material. That sounds a lot better. But some of this is a very essential part of the forest life cycle. Unfortunately, in the 1930s, and probably out of necessity and desire as well, when the trees were knocked down, the logging companies came in and removed all the trees. It was worried this was a big fire hazard, and there was always a great desire by people to tidy things up. There was all that valuable lumber, and it was quickly sent to sawmills. And in the book that I read about the 1938 hurricane, it was only in the 1980s that people used the last of the wood from what fell in their yards for fireplace, for their home fires. So that wood lasted a long time because there was so much of it. And of course, in more recent times, we have had the problems with the gypsy moth defoliation, and a lot of trees succumbed, not only because of the gypsy moth, but because of the droughts. It was like a 1-2 hit to the forest, and a lot of trees died. But disease and storms is a natural process of these forests. That's how the forest canopy gets opened up and the age stands become diversified. And there's a big concern that our forests are tend to be mostly at the same age, and that we need to log them to increase the diversification. But I think nature will actually take care of that as well. Out west, there's always a big concern about how we're going to manage our forest. One of the biggest concerns out there, they don't have the diversity of tree species, and they do tend to plant the forest lands in a monocrop planting. So when something goes wrong, it goes very wrong. The plants are screaming out for sending their volatile chemicals into the air the trees make, and that attracts the borne beetles. And it can lead to a forest fire. And everyone again thinks, oh my gosh, there's all that valuable timber that's going to waste. But there's a wonderful book called Nature's Phoenix, the ecological importance of mixed severity fires. And mixed severity means mild, little fires, medium fires, and of course, even these catastrophic fires that we get to see on television. And the fires are not always within a whole area catastrophic. Some areas will burn hotter and some areas will burn not as much. But the interesting thing is when the trees are burned, not all of the tree burns. It's usually charred on the outside. A lot of the wood physically survives that blaze. And there's a technique, Japanese technique for preserving wood for exterior siding, and you char the outside. You never have to paint it, but it doesn't rot. That charring prevents a lot of decay from going in. And these charred trees are decay resistant, and these wildfire snags can survive for a century or more. So if you go into this, you'll see these old dead trees. There are plenty of dead snags in this area, and the younger trees will grow up in between. They're not being blocked by the sunlight, but they actually tend to become restored rather quickly. But these snags can survive for over 100 years. And when the trees burn, there's this lovely woodpecker, the blackback woodpecker, seeks out these areas. They follow the areas of forest fire, and they are the first ones to come in and settle. They come in, they make nesting cavities in the tree, and they're soon followed by the beetles that smell the wood. They come in, that then provides food for the woodpeckers, and now the whole cycle starts again, because once you have the nesting cavities, a whole host of other species can come in. So what the research has been finding is when these trees are left alone, even though it seems like a colossal waste, not reharvesting the salvageable wood that's underneath the char, these forests tend to regenerate a whole lot faster than the ones where the clear-cut salvage logging has gone on. These they don't bring in the woodpeckers, they don't bring in the insect life, they don't bring in the habitat for a lot of the other woodland species. So people are starting to rethink, is it really necessary to do that? They've already burned, they're not going to burn again. Other things that affect our woods, certainly the beavers can modify the landscape. We're lucky to have beavers back after they were extirpated, but they were brought back in about the early 1900s. And of course, by damming up the streams, they do flood out a small number of trees that were used to be along the riverside, but now in the middle of the pond. And of course, we have other creatures like the porcupine that will eat. Oh, there we are, the porcupine and the sapsuckers. They also open up the tree to fungal diseases in their quest to get the sap. So a lot of these things, but this mostly on an individual basis. And then the dreaded bark-boring beetles. This is the fear that we're going to get these insect attacks on old and weakened trees. Usually a healthy tree can fight off a lot of things, but the old trees, this is the way the trees will succumb. And then because the bark-boring beetles are in there, they've laid their eggs in there, they provide a source of food for a lot of the woodpeckers that come, and they speed up the development of the younger forest. So here's a lovely, tasty woodpecker grub, and you can see how it's been eating its way through the inner bark, the tasty part. And these trees that have these bark-boring beetles have so many more woodpeckers on it. The woodpeckers will approach the tree, they'll listen for that munching that the little beetle larvae will do. They'll go in, they'll eat the larva, and they will then make their nesting cavities, which will be used by lots of other creatures. But the interesting thing with the bark-boring beetles also bring with them fungal spores on their bodies and in their droppings. This is one of the ways the fungal spores will get into the tree. So it's an important part because fungus are one of the only things that really can eat up an old dead tree. So to look at how this works, we really have to examine the structure of the tree. We have the heartwood in the center that provides the strength. We have the sapwood on the outside, which is really the living part. And you can see the annular rings. The fatter one is the spring wood, and the dark one is the summer wood. There's really no growth in the winter time. It used to be called summer and winter wood, but nothing really happens in the winter. So this is the part where the tree is protecting itself by a whole lot of chemicals, including sap, to force the beetles out. But what happens with the heartwood? Let's see. So there's a typical pattern of decay in living and dead trees, and it's slightly different for the conifers as well as for the deciduous tree. But in a live tree, the decay in the heartwood is more common. If they lose a branch, the beetles will go in through the broken branch into the heartwood and start decomposing the heartwood. And that's when you get the hollow trees. If the tree is already dead, it will, and the sapwood is resistant to decay. If the tree is already dead, say by falling over or being harvested, the sapwood will decay a lot faster than the hardwood, and it'll take a long time for that to decay. So the hard rot is what really the wildlife is looking for. So here, probably a big old branch broke off here. It might be another tree fell and damaged the bark. The rot got into the middle. And this is when you get those wonderful hollow trees that are sort of like a straw. They're still alive. The live part of the tree is on the outside, but they've lost some of the structural integrity. But here you can see one that's been hollowed out in the middle. These are the ones that are the valuable habitat trees. When they rot from the outside, they also have a role to play. And you can also see this when you go for a walk, if you see a trail, that the tree has been cut. And this is especially true with the conifers. If a tree has fallen over the trail and the trail crew has cut it and to drag it off to the side, you'll see that the sapwood is where the rot is occurring and not in the hardwood. And you can see that by the type of fungus that's growing all around the outside of the tree. And that's called sapwood rot. And here's a diagram that shows the way in which the fungus gets into the tree. When there's a breach in the sapwood, which protects the tree from this fungal rot, the fungus will get into the tree. And then this is when the tree becomes hollowed out. But with a damage to the outer bark, the tree can sometimes frequently heal itself and prevent the decay from continuing. So we've recognized how important dead trees and snags are. And I was lucky enough to take a forest management course that was offered through UConn and Yale and DEEP and one of the Connecticut Forests and Parks. And they were touting how important these dead trees are. And one of their ways of getting these dead trees in these young forests, according to them, was to cut off the bark down to the past the cambium and the outer bark. But what scientists have found that this works, but not nearly as well as nature intended. And that's really the whole gist of this talk. Is nature's figured these things out for a long time. So the bark beetle killed trees have much better woodpecker feeding activity, and the woodpeckers in their beak also have the fungal spores, which help get the fungus into the old tree. They make more cavities, And the insect diversity is much greater in the snags that are in the naturally occurring hollow trees than they are in the snags created by girdling. This is what this is called, girdling. So once the tree falls down, whether you can see this is a wind blown, it's got the root ball here, and this is a great place for lots of little seedlings or for trees that need open soil as opposed to forest duff to take root. These are the first early succession trees like birch trees. But once the tree is down, if it's on a very dry site or if it's above the ground, that tree might last a long, long time. But once it's on the ground, it starts, the fungus that's on the ground will get into it, and the creatures, the little detritivores that are on the ground will also start doing their wonderful process. And if it's on the ground and it's on moist soil, it can grade much faster, so 10 to 20 years. And there's several logs I've been watching over my time at the Nature Center, and it's fascinating. Once the rot really sets in, it can go fast, but it takes a while for it to set in. Once the bark is off and the insects can get in, and then the various activities start to take place. And then how long will it take for a log to rot or an oak stump? Oak stumps can take a long time. They're connected underground to the roots of the other trees through the mycorrhiza, which are the fungi that connect the trees, and there's a pathway for sharing some of the resources. And some of these old stumps will start to resprout. Some of them, they're not quite dead. The other trees will support these old stumps. And of course, these stumps then become a place for other wildlife and for more fungus and mosses and things like that to start to grow. So here's a log that's being taken over by these little paper fungus, and it's rotting away nicely. And so it's fun when you turn over the log and you see the mycorrhiza, the little, these are just the fruiting bodies, the apple on the apple tree. And you can see the fungus at work. The fungus are absolutely amazing creatures. That's a whole other topic. But here you can see, and the diversity of fungus, and it all depends on the year, the weather conditions, and all the things, and the type of tree. So what type of fungus you're going to get. But they're a prime source. These old dead trees are a wonderful source of carbon that's going to be returned to the soil. So here we have, this is going to be decaying, but while it's decaying, it's also a nice moist shelter for a lot of animals to live under. And as the decay process comes along, it really starts to accelerate. You can see the old woodpecker hole here that helped it early on. And now you see the tree is really starting to return to the soil. And it all depends what kind of fungus affects it. And again, it depends whether it's a conifer or a deciduous tree. So there are two kinds of fungus, the brown rot fungus and the white rot fungus. And it's fun to go through the woods and see these two. You can easily see these along the trail if you're looking for it. Brown rot fungus eats the cellulose and leaves the decay-resistant lignin behind. So it's taking away and it's leaving all that lovely organic material behind, as opposed to the white rot fungus, which eats the lignin, which is very hard to eat, and leaves the cellulose behind. And these are the trees, if you feel them, the brown rot fungus is very dry and crumbly, and the white rot fungus leaves it very soft and spongy. And so the brown rot actually adds to the organic matter in the soil, and the white rot actually holds the water like a sponge. So it's a nice refuge for a lot of animals in the drier parts of the year. And it's not only for the animals, but also for seedlings. And you can see here that this is a nurse stump. As it's rotting, it's providing its nutrients to these young trees that have taken root in the old decaying matter of the stump. And even if it's rotting from the outside, it can also become a nurse log. You can see it's rotting on the outside, but this is a home for a multitude of fungi, and you can see the little seedlings that are starting to take root in the softer decayed portion of the tree. And if you see a larger tree, you can often see these trees that in the earlier days were seedlings along this old dead tree. And as the trees rot out, you'll often see these roots sort of hanging above the forest soil where there used to be a log. The log is now decomposed and the roots are up in the air, stork-like. So the word is the ecologically healthy forest has dead trees, broken tops, and down logs. You want to see mess. And I know a lot of people don't like that mess. My father, we had a little tiny pocket woods right beside our house. in Ohio, and he loved cleaning up the debris. And I would try to tell him, no, 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 leave it there. It will rot away. It's got an important job to do. But it looked messy to him. I call that the Versailles School of Landscaping, where everything has to be just so. And when we go into our state forests, which are managed for timber and for timber harvest, you find several things. This is a reason. This is a area that was harvested a while back. But you saw, aside from this log, which I think is mostly to block the trail, there's nothing on the ground, and that was one of the things that surprised me when I was taking this course, is that we really weren't talking about anything on the ground. It was always just what was above the ground, which is how we tend to look at things anyways. This is a property that was managed by the forest harvesting to do an age diversity stand at a water company property. And you can see there is decay on the ground, but it's not large logs, it's branches, and those will rot away very, very quickly. The larger the log, the longer it takes to decay. And it's out in the open, it's very exposed. The little trees will grow up in between, but there's really nothing there to keep the deer from it. But they did put a deer exclusion fence of all the old dead trees. And they left a few trees to provide seeds, but the goal was that in a few years' time, when all these other trees grew up, they would go in and harvest them. And I did ask, well, where are the old wolf trees going to be? What are we leaving to grow old? And I really didn't get a good answer as far as I was concerned. And the interesting thing, approaching this as someone who works in a nature center and is, very aware of the role of the wildlife in the woods, it struck me as odd, because dead trees are so important to our wildlife that 2/3 of our wildlife species use dead trees or downwood during some portion of their life cycle. Maybe it's just the nesting seed period. And so, sometimes it's the little things that we overlook. I love this quote by E.O. Wilson that, that's the little things, maybe he loved ants, little things that compose the foundation of our ecosystem and run the world. And these are the things that are the easiest to overlook, because we look at big things. So when you look at dead wood, you see all the different creatures that are using this wood. You rip open a log and you can see the termites and the caterpillar beetle larvae and all sorts of different things are living in there quite happily. And there's a whole forest floor food web. All of these little creatures that live on the ground that are recycling everything that comes their way, turning it back into humus for the new trees to use. And this is another thing we barely talk about, is the soil food web. There are all sorts of, on a much smaller level, things that we don't see: the bacteria, the protozoa, the nematodes. All those things are essential to keeping our plants healthy. That's another thing we need to spend more time thinking about. So as far as the trees, the bark, there are very few things that eat wood. Termites can eat wood. They have the proper bacteria in their gut. The bark-boring beetles, their larvae can chew their way through the trees. Carpenter ants don't really eat wood, but they make tunnels for their nesting, for raising their young. And ants are one of the most common invertebrate in our forest ecosystem, and they're really, really important how the forest works. And in the aging trees, hardwood, as it softens and rots, that's when the carpenter ants move in. And while we don't want them in our house, we definitely want them in the forest. They remove the rotten wood and open up space for the nest. And of course, that allows more bacteria to come in, and the rotting process really speeds up. So here you can see the sawdust as they cleared tunnels in there to lay their eggs and feed their young. They're not really eating this, but this is the material that they chewed out. And this will very quickly turn back into that humus for the soil. So it's part of the incredible nutrient cycle for the forest floor. The other thing that ants do is they are essential for keeping our forests healthy, in that ants will often tend to aphids. They don't want, that are affecting the tree, but they don't want caterpillars to eat the leaves. That weakens the tree. So they will often patrol the tree and attack the caterpillars that are eating their aphids. So it also includes the gypsy moth and tent caterpillars. So where we have debris on the ground for the wood, for the ants, the carpenter ants, it actually helps the trees stay healthier, and then they're not being eaten as much by the gypsy moth. They're sort of like the bodyguards of the tree. And in some areas, you can get these lovely big mounds of ants. These ant hills are where the nutrients from the old dead bodies and all their waste and the seed piles that they bring in. These are very nutrient-rich areas of open soil for new trees to start to grow. And here's what this lovely relationship that nature has worked on for billions of years. The trees provide ants with shelter and protection from the herbivores. When it's younger, the ants then feed on the herbivorous insects, and the ant waste that from all that they eat then nourishes the trees. So it's a win-win for the ants and a win-win for the trees. So, and of course, I like to say that the ants are the ones that plant our spring wildflowers. A lot of our spring wildflowers, like bloodroot and trevor lily and the trillium, when they produce a seed, they produce this little fatty package on the outside full of lipids and nutrients that have absolutely nothing to do with seed. It's a bribe for the ants to take the seed down into their anthill. They will feed this elaiosome to their young, and then they have this big old seed. Well, what are they going to do with that? Because it's too big for them to eat and they don't like it. So they take it and put it into the compost bin where they throw all the old dead stuff. And that's how a lot of our wildflowers get planted. So they're like the squirrels who plant the acorns. These are the ones who plant our seeds. Of course, they're also a valuable food source for birds and even larger animals like bears. You can see this lovely little bird feasting on all these little critters. And it's also home for pollinators. And a lot of talk about the pollinator species. We have a lot of solitary and colonial bees. And they are the primary pollinators of flowers and berry producing shrubs. But some of them like to nest, like the carpenter bees like to nest in the mason bees. Well, not the mason bees so much, but some of the bees like to nest in these old hollow trees. They tend to be solitary nesters, and so they'll chew their way in, lay their young and their larvae and their eggs in there. They'll leave them with a little food, the pollen bread, and they'll hatch out of that. And also the woody debris is just, this is a picture taken at the Nature Center during our summer program. There is nothing more exciting for the children than to turn over a log and see what's underneath there. And there's so many lovely little creatures to see under there if the woods haven't been taken over by jumping worms. So here are just a few of the creatures. Some of them are predators, some are herbivores. These guys eat up the old dead stuff. These guys eat up the live stuff. But it's a whole ecosystem there. And then if we do remove dead trees after a wildflower or a beetle outbreak, it robs the area of those homes for all those microorganisms that are in the soil, and they don't get that organic material being returned back to the soil. When we harvest a tree, there was a lot of organic matter in the root system, but there's a lot of it above the ground. I think the rule of thumb is about half the organic matter is above the ground, half is below. So when we do a forest harvest, we're removing half of the organic matter that would have otherwise returned to the soil. But, on the other hand, we do need wood products. But the dead wood is one of the greatest resources for the animal species. It's lovely marble salamander living in the nice, moist, nutrient-rich and microorganism-rich soil. These are the guys that will eat a lot of those little decomposers. And they should be, in a healthy forest, they should be the most abundant vertebrate animal in the forest ecosystem, and certainly the greatest vertebrate biomass. If you added them all up, even though they're small, they're mighty. They should be the most. You added all of them up, put them on a scale, there'd be far more of them, deer or bear, and all the other animals added up. They should be there, depending on how we manage the forest. And one of the things we did when we were taking the course, we had to identify how we were going to manage. I'm on Simsbury Land Trust, how we're going to manage our forest. And we don't really have enough trees to harvest. It's kind of a motley selection of trees. But I thought, well, we'll manage them for salamanders. That would be the most reasonable thing. Manage them for invasive plant removal and for salamanders. So those salamanders also become food for higher up the food chain. So here you can, turkeys and moles and garter snakes and ribbon snakes all eat those salamanders. But they're also a predator. They eat a whole lot of those creatures that are in the soil. So that's all part of the food chain, and they're very important, and we don't pay enough attention to them. They're cute, they're interesting, but we don't really recognize their importance. So, and this is the thing, there are more than 40 vertebrate species that rely on the presence of dead wood. That's a lot of species. And there's a lot of moisture, the dry years we've had sometimes it was hard for these animals to find a nice moist place. But the trees with the white rot were some of the last refuges of the forest species. And of course, dead snag is a perfect place perch for our raptors. Provides a nice spot to view whatever it is they want to find to eat. And the great blue heron follow the beavers. Here's a beaver lodge. They follow the beavers wherever they go, wherever they make a pond and kill the local trees that were by the river. That provides a wonderful nesting opportunity for the great blue heron. They like having the moat around their nest. And so wherever the beavers are, these guys are close behind. And the most important species in the wood are these guys, not just the pileated or pileated. It's the ones that I like to call them the general contractors of the forest, the nest excavators. They will make feeding holes, which will help hollow out the tree, but if they will at nesting time make a bigger hole. And some of these species will use their nest more than once, but some will just use it once and move on. They have the skills to make another tree hole. And so some of these are better at making nests than others. The downy has a very small hole beak, so he's not nearly as good as the hairy, but they still excavate their own homes or use the other homes made by the other creatures. And of course, and the chickadees can excavate if it's a nice soft hollow tree. But here, we can see that, in North America, the dead trees are incredibly important for the success of their life cycle. And I would argue that perhaps some of the decline in our bird population is also in part, and these are very complex systems, but part that we have just young trees. We need more old trees, and we tend to take down the old trees in part because of safety and part because they don't look good. Although the plans are now to leave up as many dead trees as possible. And there's just a host of animals that will take advantage of these old hollows, whether they're naturally occurring or woodpecker produced. And I love these guys, the black vulture and the turkey vulture. They will come. The larger the dead snag, the bigger the animal will use it. And here is I don't know if that's a turkey vulture or a black vulture nest. They will go into these old trees, and they will also use one that has the scar at the bottom of the tree. They'll nest down there. Not too many creatures will mess with them. And of course, I love this. This is a hollow tree that was at the end of someone's driveway. It was a little bit unnerving for them, but this bear was hibernating at the end of someone's driveway in an old hollow tree. When the hollow trees fall down, they become host for other animals. And we need those birds because they do play, again, an important role in the regulation of forest insect populations. These guys are extremely good at finding these caterpillars, and we know that it takes a tremendous number of caterpillars to feed our songbirds. It takes Douglas Talmay, who's an entomologist at the University of Delaware, sent his grad students out to find out, and we found out that it takes between 6,000 to 10,000 caterpillars to feed one nest of chickadees. So that's an important aspect of the trees. I guess they do support a lot of the moss species, which are the food for the birds. And then once all the creatures get in there, rotting out the logs, then it becomes food for even creatures as large as a bear. But all of them will start ripping apart those trees, and the holes and the ripping with the claws of the larger species quickly make short work of those old trees. And when you see a pileated woodpecker with these feeding holes, that's not a sign. They don't attack healthy trees. They only affect the trees that already have some damage. And if you have this on your property, they're actually doing you a service. They're letting you know that tree is maybe not as safe as it should be. It's too close to maybe too close to your house or property line. A lot of animals, as I said, take refuge under the rotting logs. And then those rotting logs become a whole a spot for the fungi and a whole host of fungi. And those fungi in turn, the mushrooms of fruiting bodies, feed a lot of creatures from turtles, birds, mice, squirrels, and deer. And if you look on the ground, you'll often see a lot more fungi. This is the common green shield on dead branches on the ground. They're taking care of that old decomposition. So there's a lot of diversity of the old dead stuff. And actually the old trees have more lichens, more lichen diversity than the younger trees. So yeah, I love this, the sugar maple might harbor a dozen species or more, but the older the tree, the more diverse their lichens. And they're relatively valuable for fungi. And we're only really getting to know the importance of the fungi and the wood decay. We know, the honey mushrooms are very aggressive with even living trees and killing them, the saprophytic mushrooms. But it is an important part of opening up the tree forest. It is one of the processes for change in the forest, and forests are always changing. When a tree falls down, it's very good, especially on the side of a slope. It's very good as stabilizing slopes, reducing erosion, and sheltering the seedlings here. It makes it hard for the deer to get at them. But it's also very important in our streams. It used to be when trees fell into the stream, oh my gosh, that was bad. We had to take them out. A lot of work went into removing them. And it is kind of annoying for the kayakers and canoers. But these old dead logs are essential for the health of the stream. They slow down the velocity of the water. They trap sediment behind them. They actually provide lots of little habitats for the fish that need a refuge. And the new research is showing that the more dead wood you have in a stream, the more fish you have. So deadwood, again, is very good. And this is something that's begun to realize in various other countries. This is an article from The Guardian about Finland. They have many, a lot of the northern forest, and they were managing them in a way to produce the timber. But they found out that no, it wasn't really healthy for the forest. And I like this, they're starting from zero. They're rethinking how to return wildlife after decades of intensive forest management, because you really do need these old dead trees, and there weren't any. So they're starting to allow the trees to fall, to get decayed, and it's not something the foresters are particularly keen on, but they recognize that forests don't survive. They're not just gardens of trees, they are an ecosystem. So it's very interesting. And I know in Scotland they're doing rewilding. This is a big new term in the forest. But again, I said, where in our management, where are the future wolf trees? We need to think about that. We need to think that those trees are going to be left, and hopefully they will survive, because when that forest is cut like this, a big windstorm can knock down those trees very quickly, because they don't have the support of the other trees. But we need the old dead trees. This is an important part of the life cycle of the forest. And here we just don't have many old trees. In the 1620, when the Europeans came, there was a lot of big old trees. And there is a meadow and all, there was lots of change. By 1850, we were really undergoing a dramatic change in how we managed. And you can see by 1990, we didn't have any virgin forest left, any old growth trees, but that's starting to change a little bit. There's a movement to leave some of these old growth forests. Now they're very susceptible. There was the cathedral pines in Cornwall, Connecticut. It did get blown down by a big windstorm. There's still some areas nearby where there are big trees. But in order to have big trees, we have to leave some of the smaller big trees to turn into older big trees. And unfortunately, doesn't seem to be a big priority, although it's starting to be a little bit of a priority. But we have to see, where can we leave these things. And it's interesting, less than 1%, so very tiny area, have old growth forest characteristics. There's some forest management techniques that say, oh, we can speed that process up, but I'm not sure that speed is how we get to that. So there is a group called the Old Growth Forest Network. This is a forest very close to our town library. It's right in the middle of downtown Simsbury, if you could say downtown. And it's belted forest, and these were trees that have been left. And some of these trees are 140, 150 years old. Some magnificent old white pines. And it was one of the first Connecticut listing identified in Old Growth Forest Network. And I know I serve on the Conservation Commission, and there was a lot of debate by our commissioners as to why would we want to leave it like that. We don't know what old growth forest will look like, and we might not like it. And it was like, it doesn't matter. you know, an old growth forest is very diverse. It's not just old ancient trees. It's old trees and young saplings like this, because as the old trees die, it opens up the forest. And so they are rather diverse. So this requires a bit of education on our part. And there's a lovely term called proforestation, the practice of protecting existing natural forests to foster continuous growth, carbon accumulation, structural complexity. And I'd like to add to that, and wildlife diversity, because that's why we need the old growth forest, because of the wildlife diversity that these old growth forests provide. And this is a wonderful old tree on the McLean Game Refuge in Granby. I love this quote by Aldo Leopold: "The real jewel of my disease-ridden woodlot is the pronothary warbler. The flash of his golden blue plumage amid the dank decay of the June woods is in itself proof that dead trees are transmuted into living animals and vice versa." I think that's how we need to look. We need to think more positively on the senescing and dying of these trees. After all, we are in the Charter Oak state. This is our state tree, and it was precisely because of an old dead senescing tree that the charter that was given to Connecticut by the English king, Charles something or other, they were able to secrete it in the hollow tree. So who else but Connecticut should be advocating for old senescing hollow trees but us? So I think it's a fascinating story. I don't think it's one that we're not all that familiar with, but I love this is a quote by a UN scientist. And in the end, we conserve only what we love. We love only what we understand, and we understand only what we are taught. So I hope you will look at your forest in a totally different way when you go for your walk next. So thank you.
Thank you, Margery. We did have one question from early on,
All right.
and that was the name of the book about forest fires.
Oh, let me go back to that. Let me see. It's it has a phoenix. It's let me sketch that. It's called. All right. It's called The Ecological Importance of Mixed Severity Fires. And it's called Nature's Phoenix.
And I'll put a link to that in the
Okay.
email that goes out tomorrow.
Okay. All right.
Does anyone else have questions? If so, you can unmute yourself and ask.
So
Another very informative program.
thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
Next time you see Jay, tell him I said hello.
Will too. I'm glad my voice held out for this program.
Yep.
A little raspy, but at least it held out. All right, will do. All right,
Oh,
thank you. Oh,
Holly, did you have a question?
I did. I was just wondering, they're in Newtown, they had the Rabbitat where we took a piece of property, and this was just when I was getting into the Conservation Commission, and they pretty much totally cleared this several acres for habitat for the New England cottontail. How do we convince them that maybe this is, they left a couple of seed trees, but then a storm came and knocked those down. So
Yeah.
it didn't seem like a good idea. And I'm just wondering, how do you convince people that we need our old trees?
well, I'm sorry, but I started to do this program. We had a lot of discussion at our Simsbury Conservation Commission on how to manage the properties that the town owns. And there was a lot of disagreement. We did have forest management plans that were done very professionally, but they were 10 years old, and there's been so much change in how we understand and view forests now than even just 10 years ago. And it took a lot of convincing to say, look, we're not in a hurry. We're not in a hurry. There's no immediate need to do this. And as for the we can wait and take our time with the management. Do invasive plant removal. Trees are on a whole different schedule from us. So that's, just put brakes on things. But the other thing, as far as as far as the rabbit clearing, and there are only certain areas where those rabbits are going to be. So, you know, if you're adjacent to that area, okay, maybe you do that. But generally, you know, nature will take care of it too. They'll make openings. But when we get concentrated on just one species, I know the local forest here, they were concentrating on managing just for woodcock. When we concentrate on one species, we tend to miss the whole big picture. So yes, it's nice to manage for the New England cottontail. And you know, every group is, you know, welcome to do, you know, what they think is the right thing with their forest. But you know, there's a lot of disturbance, even with the new forest equipment. There's a lot of disturbance of the soil, a lot of disturbance of the mycorrhiza, and a lot of forests that get opened up, they instantly turn into birch trees. They're tricky. I don't think we know as much about forests as we should. So I'm always offering caution. Let's just take it slowly. It takes a long time for a forest to grow back. It takes hardly any time to chop it down.
Right. Thank you.
All right. And I see that someone is recommending The Hidden Life of Trees. That's a lovely book. And Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard is a fantastic tree. There's just so many lovely books coming out now about trees, and about forest management that aren't necessarily coming through the forest management. I mean, Suzanne Simard and Peter Wolleben were in the forest industry, but they were looking at thinking that it's something not going well in our forest management. So, you know, then the problem is we still need wood. And in Simsbury, we have a managed forest that's managed by DEP, but on our land trust properties, we don't know anything about managing forests, nor do we want to manage forests. And the hikers will get very upset if suddenly the forest is all chopped down. So we are making the choice to leave those to be old growth. Someone has to make them old growth forests. Someone has to take the thing with it. And it's a lot easier to manage for old growth than it is for timber harvest and all the headaches that come along with that. Soil erosion and disruption to the forest floor. So we, you know, at least for the next little bit, we're thinking, just let it go and do invasive plant species, because that is the biggest problem in our somewhat semi-urban or suburban rural forests. Is when we chop down the trees, it's just an invitation for the invasives to come in. And that's a huge concern. We have many fewer invasive species in an old growth forest.
That's another problem, trying to get our state and local
Yes.
officials to understand what a problem the invasives.
Yeah, we had a timber harvest that was going to go on next to the school, where they had a little nature trail through the woods, and the public rose up and said, no, you can't timber harvest there. And it's not that we were against timber harvesting, because that's going on in several other places, but it was right along a road where the invasive species are just horrible. And so it would require chopping down the trees and then constantly managing for the invasive species. And we didn't think that was well thought out.
The other thing that strikes me is that talking about the forest looking neat and tidy, that's nice if you like neat and tidy, but the forest is not for us. It's for the forest creatures.
No, nature,
and they don't like it neat and tidy.
You know, nature likes best, and you know, but the dog owners don't like it. But then, if you're managing the forest for birds, dogs shouldn't be there in the first place. But that's a whole touchy thing, and certainly we have with our land trust, you know, we have people who love their dogs, and rightly so. But you know, trying to keep them out of certain areas where the birds are nesting at certain times of year is hard for even people dedicated to preserving land for the land trust.
Anybody else have a question?
I have another comment to add, some information to share with people who are living either in Orange or around Orange. Yesterday, as I was driving out of my street, headed towards Route 34, I live near the Amity Junior High School. There was a bear that went scampering across the road and tried to climb a tree in my neighbor's yard.
Well, I live in Simsbury. We're thinking of changing the name to Simsbury. because we just get we have so many bears. They're frequent gardening companions for me.
Margery, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
I'm glad your voice held out.
So am I. I was doubtful
and-
there for a moment.
And it, your cold is short-lived.
I hope so too. Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody.
Thank
See you
you.
next time.
Bye-bye.